This is chapter 8, the final chapter in Joey Reynolds' life. Well, actually, the final chapter hasn't been written yet, I hope. Joey Reynolds, let a smile be your umbrella, but don't get a mouthful of rain. The Joey Reynolds Story. Peter Bogdanovich was going to film it, but he got busy with Tom Petty, who actually gave him money. So that'll do it, you know. But he had George Gallagher, the actor, all set to play me as a young man. Now that George is my age, we got to find a new kid. But let a smile be your umbrella. Don't get a mouthful of rain. Chapter 8, Comedy and Conscience. And dance like nobody's watching. Try not to confuse ratings with listeners. I don't owe my career to ratings. I owe it to listeners. I don't do my show for numbers on a page, for some scientifically chosen focus group that management assembled out in Piscataway, New Jersey. I do my show for flesh and blood. I do my show for flesh and blood folks who could be my friends and neighbors. I respect and appreciate my listeners, not only because it's my job, but also because listening is not a skill, and I myself have thoroughly mastered it. Now, you would think as a talk radio host I'd know when to shut up and listen. It always hasn't been that easy. In fact, people have screamed at me, yet I didn't hear a word they were saying. People have cried in my arms, and I still didn't listen. I'm learning now how important listening is. It's something we all need to work at. It doesn't necessarily come naturally. Here, for example, is a cautionary tale about what can happen when you don't listen to your wife. When WNBC hired me away from Philadelphia oldies station WFIL in the mid-'80s, I commuted from Philly to the Big Apple, but the manager of the station encouraged my wife and me to buy a house closer to New York. He gave us the impression I'd be at NBC for a long time, so we went ahead and bought a house in New Jersey. It took us a while, but we moved all of our stuff and got settled. Then NBC was sold, and I was out. Now, that's the third. I worked for NBC 3 times. The second time was a charm. First one was in Denver when I worked for them, and I had the all-night simulcast on radio and television on KOA. And then NBC in New York, when I kind of replaced Howard Stern. I came months later, so I didn't really replace him. It's really interesting to have to do something different. They didn't want scatological humor, they said. So they put me on the air, and I was the father of it all. So you go right to the source and change the guy, right? That's like asking George Carlin to read the rosary. My wife was pissed off at a station manager. She said he knew they were selling the station, yet he encouraged us to go ahead and buy a house here. So Carolyn sat on the steps of the house in New Jersey. We were in Verona, which is lower Montclair. She said, why do we have to move again and everybody else in the neighborhood gets to stay? I said, well, because I'm in this business. Getting a new job means moving to a new city. That was the rub. She said, well, you got one more move left. I was very careful in choosing my next job. I wanted to be in a place where Carolyn could put down roots and do things like golf, for one, because she was a great golfer. And a station in Connecticut offered me a morning show for around $250,000, I think, and offered to buy me a house, but I turned it down. I thought the market was too risky and the climate too cold for Carolyn. So I decided to go to Florida, where the weather was better for golf. I would have liked to have gone back to California, but I figured Carolyn had had enough of that show business scene. Plus, we're closer to my mother-in-law, and she loved to be with the kids, So we got a beautiful home on a golf course in Florida. Thanks to John Tenaglia, who was the owner of the station, WSHE. She is only rock and roll. I took a radio job with the Italian guy. I figured I'd work for Paisano for a change, and up until then, I'd mostly worked for Jews, and in this case, I wish I still had. It was the worst mistake ever. I hope John's listening to me read my book. The she owner made me the morning man. He said he'd give me a lot of freedom. I did a brief trial run to see whether I'd like it, and he gave me the freedom he promised. But after I took the job, little by little, the freedom went away. He had something else in mind for the show, but he couldn't put it into words. This happens all the time. Management really has something in mind. They want you because of your persona. They get you on the job, and then they want to change you. That experience soured me in Florida, actually. I wanted to move again. I needed to move again, and radio was my mistress. She was breaking up my marriage. Poor radio. Now, let me mention that John Tenaglia, who is a brilliant businessman and a really good guy, he had the first of the hippest stations in the world in Philadelphia with the greatest call letters, Wi-Fi, W-I-F-I, Wi-Fi. And John was very, he was easy to work for if you were his friend. But as soon as you go on the job, see, he wanted me to play records in the morning. And I didn't want to play music. And he said, she is only rock and roll. I got to have Goomba. I got to have a little bit of music. But I got to have a lot of you listening to me. So anyway, he sent me back up to New York. He said that the people down here in Florida are, how did he phrase it? He said, you know, you got a lot of rednecks and hysterical Hispanics. They took a lot of surveys, but I had such a great time here. And even Terry Lynn, who was the publicist, she put me on the boat, the Sequoia, which was the Kennedy boat where he actually had affairs with Marilyn Monroe, we think. But, you know, she did a lot of promotions for me, and she's the best. She is the best. Now, after this, in my book, 10 years have gone by now since Carolyn and I divorced, but I'm starting to figure out what went wrong. The other night, I thought I finally figured it out, and I asked Carolyn why she divorced me. Was it because of NBC? I asked, we got divorced because of radio, right? She says, no, we got divorced because you wouldn't listen. And now I'm living with my ex-wife. Go figure. Some people need managers, promoters, and other assorted star makers in order to become celebs. Others are just born stars, like one of my best friends, Rod Roddy, the Regal announcer for The Price is Right. He started out as a DJ as Hot Rod Roddy in Oklahoma. I met him in Pittsburgh, where he was the #1 jock, and the year the Pirates won the World Series. He was very clever, colorful, and successful. I helped him get a job in Buffalo when no one would touch him, actually. We worked there together for a few years. The radio station had a basketball team, which he and I played on. Actually, I played and he emceed. Rod wouldn't play because, according to him, stars don't sweat. And he said, I'm not a fucking circus act. I didn't put that in the book. Roddy eventually went to work at Cliff in Dallas. He had a radio talk show, and one night he insulted his guest, who was the reigning Miss America, at KLIF in Dallas. In the studio, there was room enough for only one person to wear a crown, and it wasn't going to be her. Whatever he said, she responded by throwing coffee on him. So he feigned a heart attack, and they took him to the Parkland Memorial, the same hospital where they took President Kennedy after the assassination. And within the hour, he was set up in his own private room and was ordering a special meal from the menu. He was always like that. A few years back, Roddy and I met in Buffalo for our old radio station's 25th reunion. Since he considered himself now a star on CBS, he demanded a limo, a first-class room, a first-class flight. He even brought his own shower nozzle. Wouldn't that have been something to do during this coronavirus? He brought his own shower nozzle because he liked a certain kind of spray on his tushy. But on his way back to L.A., he forgot to pack the shower nozzle in the luggage check, so he had to put it in a carry-on bag. Well, the security people wouldn't let him take the nozzle on board, and the pipe was classified as a weapon or something. He bickered back and forth with the airline people, and furious, he finally had to leave it behind, and then they mailed it to him. A disgruntled passenger who was irritated by the delay that Roddy's skirmish was causing yelled that Roddy could take the nozzle and shove it up his ass. Roddy replied, well, what do you think it's for? Do you ever wonder where they get the idea for movies and comedy shows today? Do you know where the heart of comedy comes from? AA meetings. All these writers are in AA, recovering, listening to other people's stories of decline and devastation. I swear, I go to the movies today and think, hey, wait a second, that looks familiar. It's ironic, but a lot of great comedy comes out of pain, whether it's the pain of addiction or of loneliness, of disease or misfortune. You ever wonder why some of our best comedians have had such screwed up lives? That's why they're great comedians. They're mining their own material and trying to make some real heavy shit feel light. If everything is going along great for you, you're already smiling and don't need to think up a great comedy, you know. It's often the folks who are in the most pain who come up with the best laughs. It's a way to combat pain. Comedy is the silver lining to life's misfortune, but we have to be willing to laugh at ourselves to fully benefit from our hardships. I think some perfectly sober writers go to AA just to write. Like Baker's Secret, it's a writer's secret. You know, go to AA meetings, get everybody's material, and pretend you thought it up first. Larry David, he and I have similar thought patterns. I think we were probably experiencing the same childhood of being ignored, terribly unattractive, and looking for some way to get into society. And since no one let us in, we created our own plow through the snow. of life. I lost one of my best friends a couple of years ago, Tom Chauvin. He had owned Puffs magazine, along with Bob Sillerman, who was partners with cousin Bruce Morrow. They syndicated programs on radio stations across the country. I know Tom. Tom had passed away, and the radio business is missing him dearly. He was a forward-thinking man. When he was driving out of Dallas on his way to New York, he'd be counting out exact change for the Jersey toll booth. He was always way ahead. Tom was a huge influence on me. He was huge, period. I never met a man with an appetite like him. I remember once we were in Providence, Rhode Island, at a joint on this beach called Custy's that offered all-you-can-eat lobster for $18. So Tom, some friends like Randy West and myself, we set up camp there around noon. We brought cards. We played through dinner. By that time, of course, I never wanted to see another lobster, but Tom had eaten 63 of them. That's 63 lobsters in one day-long sitting. Made the front page of the Providence Journal. When asked how he had eaten that many lobsters, he replied, "Oh, a lobster, there's not a lot of meat." Oh, I could tell you the story about going to the Bill Gavin Radio Records party where there was a large bowl of shrimp in the middle of the room, waiting for the crowd to come. And Tom had sneaked in there ahead of the crowd. So when the crowd arrived and they opened these alligator doors, these folding doors, and everybody walked in, there was nothing but shrimp shells. It had been destroyed. Bouncing from one radio station to another, drug to drug, and bad attitude to worse attitude has made me pretty appreciative of the friends, fans, and fellow Christians, not to mention God, who have stuck with me over the years. I say let's welcome back as many screwed up prodigals as we can find. Did someone say party? And because of the coronavirus, I just wiped my hands of my book. I don't want to catch this. I hope you caught a smile, and I want you to let it be an umbrella, but don't get a mouthful of rain. The Joey Reynolds Story. Close the book. I got to write another book. I hope the next part of my life is not a pamphlet. It's a Reynolds wrap.